This is not just history. This is the story of a world brought to its knees, of prayers unanswered, of streets filled with silence, of a plague so merciless it reshaped the future. Welcome to medieval history, where the forgotten stories of the Middle Ages come to life, one haunting tale at a time. Imagine waking up to find your neighbor dead. By nightfall, your family is coughing blood, and by the next sunrise, you're gone. In just 4 years, a silent killer swept through towns, tore families apart, and wiped out 1/3 of Europe's population. But this wasn't just a disease. It was a collapse of society, of faith, and of everything people thought was safe. This is the true story of the Black Death, the most terrifying pandemic in human history. It began with a whisper, a strange illness in distant lands, a few merchants falling ill, a ship arriving in the harbor with no one left alive. No one could have imagined that what arrived in Europe in the year 1347 would become the deadliest catastrophe the continent had ever seen. Within just a few months, entire villages stood silent. Streets filled with corpses, fields were left unplowed, churches echoed with prayers and screams, mothers buried children, children buried parents. And when no one was left to bury the dead, the bodies piled high in mass graves. They called it the Great Mortality, but history remembers it as something darker, the Black Death. It would kill over 25 million people in Europe, alone nearly 1 out of every 3. But this was not just a biological disaster. It was a breakdown of civilization, of religion, of trust. It reshaped cities, economies, and belief systems, and from the ashes of that suffering, a new world would rise. This is the full, untold story of the Black Death, how it began, how it spread, and how it changed the course of history forever. Before the plague swept across Europe, it began thousands of miles away, in the vast, windswept grasslands of Central Asia, a land of caravans, nomadic tribes, and empire. The year was the early 1330s, a silent spark in Central Asia, the remote regions near Lake Isakulin, modern-day Kyrgyzstan. A mysterious disease began to kill entire communities. People fell sick with fever, chills, swollen glands, and died within days. Local records, including gravestones near trading posts, later revealed a spike in deaths during this period. The region sat on the Silk Road, the massive trade network that linked the East to the West, from China to the Middle East, and all the way to Europe. Goods, spices, silk, and ideas traveled these roads daily. But with them came something else, Sia, tiny stowaway, a flea, carried by rats, infected with a deadly bacteria, Yersinia pestis. It hitched rides on trade caravans across deserts and mountains, hiding in bundles of fur and grain. At the time, much of Asia was controlled by the powerful and far-reaching Mongol Empire, led by the descendants of Genghis Khan. The empire had connected vast territories through military conquest and trade, creating an unprecedented level of movement between regions. But this movement also allowed diseases to spread like never before. As traders, soldiers, and travelers moved westward, so did the infection slowly, invisibly, and fatally. By 1346, the plague had reached the Crimean Peninsula at the edge of Europe. There, in the city of Kaffa, bustling Genoese trade colony, a horrifying event occurred. The city was under siege by Mongol forces, who were themselves being ravaged by the plague. In desperation, the Mongol army is said to have catapulted the bodies of their own dead soldiers over the city walls, infecting those inside. This chilling act has been called one of the first known instances of biological warfare. Genoese traders fled the city by sea, heading back to ports in Italy, France, and beyond. But they didn't escape the disease, they carried it with them. As ships departed the Black Sea and crossed the Mediterranean, many of the sailors aboard began to fall ill and die. When they reached ports like Messina in Sicily, they brought with them the unseen killer that would change the course of European history forever. What had started as a whisper in the east was now a storm sailing toward the heart of the Western world. Death did not arrive with fanfare. It slipped into Europe, hidden among cargo, cloaked in silence, and carried by men who had no idea they were doomed. In October 1347, 12 Genoese merchant ships arrived in the port of Messina on the island of Sicily. The harbor masters were horrified by what they saw. Most of the sailors were dead or dying, their bodies bloated, covered in black boils that oozed pus and blood. The living were barely conscious, feverish, coughing and screaming in pain. Authorities quickly ordered the ships to leave the harbor, but it was too late. The rats had already disembarked. The fleas had already jumped. The plague had found a new home. From Messina, the disease spread rapidly, following the trade routes and pilgrim paths that crisscrossed Europe in weeks. It reached Genoa and Venice, major trade hubs in northern Italy, by early 1348. It reached Marseille, France, and Barcelona, Spain. That spring, it crossed the Alps into Switzerland and Germany. By the summer of 1348, it had spread to England, likely landing at Bristol via ships from Gascony. Everywhere it went, death followed. People died within 3 to 5 days of their first symptoms. Whole towns vanished. The disease struck without mercy, rich or poor, young or old. In some villages, everyone died. Survivors abandoned homes, farms, even family members. Cities began to collapse under the weight of the dead. In Florence, corpses were stacked in the streets and left to rot. In Paris, priests couldn't bury the dead fast enough. In London, mass graves, known as plague pits, swallowed thousands of bodies. The streets were silent, save for the wailing of the dying and the creak of carts piled with corpses. People were terrified. Chroniclers wrote of chaos, fear, and apocalyptic visions. Italian writer Giovanni Boccaccio, in the Decameron, described people fleeing their own families in terror. Many believed it was God's punishment for sin. Others thought the air was poisoned. Rumors blamed the stars, the weather, or foreign enemies. Doctors were powerless. Remedies failed. The church, overwhelmed by death, could offer no comfort. By the end of 1348, much of southern Europe was already devastated. By 1349, the plague reached Scandinavia and Ireland. In 1350, it swept through Eastern Europe, including Poland, Hungary, and Russia. No region was truly spared except a few. Mysterious cases, like Milan, where strict early quarantines may have saved many lives. The Black Death was no longer an outbreak. It was a continent-wide collapse, and Europe was drowning in its own dead. Boy hadn't seen his mother in 2 days. She had locked herself in the bedroom, whispering prayers through cracked lips and wooden walls. The bubo under her arm had turned black, and the fever made her eyes roll like stormy seas. By the time the boy dared to open the door, she was gone. The year is 1348, and Europe is no longer alive in the way it once was. In the towns, silence is louder than any scream. The chiming of church bells for the dead rings constantly. Some say the clanging never stops. Others say the priests have stopped ringing them because there are too many corpses and not enough hands to bless them. It begins with a fever, nothing unusual at first, but then the pain comes, a sharp ache in the joints, a fire in the blood, and then the swelling. Great black lumps, buboes, rise beneath the arms, behind the ears, between the legs. They pulse, they rot, they burst. The skin turns ashen, the fingers purple. Some begin to bleed from the eyes. Others vomit clots of blood onto the dirt. People wail for help, for God, for mercy, but no one answers. Even the doctors won't come anymore. Those who still walk the streets wear long beaked masks, stuffed with herbs and soaked cloth, believing the smell of flowers will keep the sickness away. But they're as helpless as the rest. In London, a cart rolls down the narrow street at dawn. "Bring out your dead," the driver calls. A man opens his door and drags the body of his wife into the light. She's still warm. He pauses, but what choice does he have? Inside, their daughter is coughing. In Paris, gravediggers refuse to touch the dead. Instead, they dig plague pits, huge trenches filled by the hundreds. No names, no markers, just one shovel of dirt after another. In the countryside, it's worse. The plague moves faster than messengers. Villagers vanish without a trace. Some burn their homes to stop the infection. Others simply walk into the forest and never return. A woman in Burgundy covers her infant with a wool blanket, sings a lullaby, and lies beside him. Her husband died that morning. Her neighbors are gone. She closes her eyes, waiting. They say 1/3 of all people in Europe died. But numbers mean nothing to the child who buries his father, to the wife who digs a grave with her bare hands, to the priest who blesses bodies by the dozen, then coughs into his sleeve and falls to his knees. And while the sickness tears through homes and cities, it also tears through faith. Some believe it is God's punishment, cleansing of sin. Others say the devil walks among them, or that the air itself has turned poisonous. Many search for someone to blame, and soon the scapegoats will burn. But for now, in the year 1348, in the dark heart of the plague, all anyone knows is fear. And still, the cart rolls on. Bring out your dead. The pile grows higher. Were quiet now, but the churches were full, not with the sick, with the terrified. They knelt in the cold, coughing behind sleeves, whispering prayers to a God who no longer answered. By 1349, death was everywhere, and when the body breaks down, the mind begins to follow. No one knew why the plague came. The doctors had failed. The kings had fled. The streets were ruled by silence and the smell of rot. So people turned to the only explanation they could cling to. God's wrath, they said. It was the world's sin that brought the plague. Greed, pride, Lust, the corruption of cities, the pride of kings, the decadence of nobles. In towns across Europe, people took to the roads, barefoot and bleeding, whipping themselves with ropes and metal chains. They called themselves flagellants, marching from city to city in long processions, chanting hymns, weeping, and calling down forgiveness. They believed if they suffered enough, maybe God would take pity. But the more they marched, the more the panic grew. If it wasn't God, then someone must have caused this. Rumors began to spread like the plague itself. Some whispered that foreigners had poisoned the wells. Others claimed witches and sorcerers had summoned demons. Many pointed fingers at a group already long hated in much of Europe. The Jews, accused of mixing poison powders, accused of consorting with Satan. In town after town, Jewish communities were massacred, burned alive in their homes, drowned in rivers, lynched in city squares. Even though some cities, like Avignon, tried to protect them, the hysteria was unstoppable. In Strasbourg, 2,000 Jews were burned alive in a single day. In Mainz, the entire Jewish population was wiped out in less than a week. The plague had revealed Europe's greatest sickness, fear disguised as faith. Inside the churches, even the priests lost courage. Many fled, others died, trying to give last rites. Those who remained began to wonder, if God is merciful, why is he silent? In cities like Florence, Paris, and Cologne, funeral rites were abandoned. No one rang the bells anymore. No one lit candles. Away from the church entirely, falling into despair or wild hedonism, drinking, gambling, and sinning in defiance of death. Others grew more extreme, more violent, more desperate. Faith gave people hope. Fear gave them enemies, and both led them to fire. Yet, in the quietest corners of the ruined cities, there were still those who knelt and prayed not to be spared, but to understand, because they knew the world they had known was gone forever. The bells stopped ringing, the carts stopped rolling, the dead were too many, and the living too few. By 1350, the plague had consumed nearly all of Europe, from the stone streets of Paris to the muddy fields of England, from the frozen hills of Norway to the markets of Constantinople. Silence replaced order. But the plague wasn't just a killer of bodies. It was a great unmaking, a torch set to the fragile web of feudal life in the medieval world. Everything had its place. Kings ruled by divine right. Lords owned the land. Peasants toiled, tithed, and obeyed. But now the peasants were gone. Entire villages lay empty. Manors stood abandoned, crops rotting in the fields. The land was silent, and land means nothing if there is no one left to work it. The surviving peasants, the lucky few, suddenly found themselves valuable. For the first time in generations, they could demand better pay, move to new towns, even refuse their lords. And the lords, desperate for labor, had no choice but to agree. The plague did what no army ever could. It gave power to the poor. Gold meant nothing if there was no food to buy. Cities lost their merchants. Guilds lost their craftsmen. Ships sat docked. Markets crumbled. But amid the ashes, something new stirred. A small group of survivors, bankers, and thinkers began to rise. They took risks, they moved goods, they printed books, and from the plague's destruction came the seeds of a new economy and eventually a new age. The church, once the unshakable center of medieval life, had failed to protect its flock. The nobles had hidden behind castle walls. The kings had fled or fallen silent. For many survivors, faith was broken, and with it, the old certainties of the medieval mind crumbled. People began to question, if God can allow this, what else have we misunderstood? This slow unraveling of belief would echo across Europe for centuries, leading eventually to the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the birth of modern thought. The world before the Black Death was one of tradition, obedience, and divine order. The world after was something entirely new. Children who grew up during the plague became adults in a scarred, unstable world. They valued survival over tradition. They questioned authority. They believed in change because they had seen the unthinkable happen. And slowly, Europe began to rebuild, not as it was, but as something it had never been before. The plague took their parents, their priests, their homes, and their gods, but it gave them one strange, terrifying gift: freedom. When the smoke cleared, the graves were full, the cities hollow, and the people changed. The Black Death didn't vanish overnight. It drifted away, wave by wave, leaving only ghosts behind. By 1351, the worst had passed. But the scars it left behind would echo through centuries. It's estimated that 25 to 50 million people died in Europe, nearly 1/3 to 1/2 of the population. In some towns, 70% were gone. In others, there were no survivors at all. Entire bloodlines ended, libraries closed, churches were empty. Even the birds stopped singing, as if nature itself had been wounded. The plague had redrawn the map of life. And yet, amid the horror, something began to stir. People no longer blindly trusted old systems. They questioned the church, the nobility, even God. Many turned to science, medicine, and human reason, teeny sparks of what would one day become the Renaissance. Doctors who had failed learned to observe. Writers who had mourned began to record. Painters found meaning in sorrow, drawing death not as an end, but a mirror to life. The world began to remember. The idea of quarantine took root. Public health became a real concern. Cities began to track disease, to clean streets, to separate the sick. Trade networks slowly revived. Wealth shifted into new hands. And from that disruption, new social classes emerge. The merchant, the banker, the individual. The medieval world died. But in its ashes, the modern world began to breathe. Everywhere, the Black Death haunted the imagination. In paintings, skeletons danced with nobles and peasants alike. In literature, like the Decameron and Piers Plowman, authors captured the despair and absurdity of life. In cathedrals and carvings, death became a companion, not a stranger. But this obsession with death didn't end in fear. It evolved into a deeper appreciation of life, beauty, and time. If death can come tomorrow, then today must be lived with meaning. The plague never truly disappeared. It returned in smaller waves for centuries. Even today, its bacterium still exists in isolated pockets of the world. But never again would it tear through humanity with such fury, and never again would Europe be the same. The Black Death was not just a tragedy. It was a turning point. It killed millions, but it also killed the medieval mindset. And from that death came rebirth of ideas, of identity, of civilization itself. We tell the story not to remember the darkness, but to honor what rose from it, because after the Black Death, the world was smaller, but the future was bigger. History remembers the kings and castles, but sometimes it's the graveyards that tell the real story. The Black Death didn't just end lives, it ended certainties. It burned away the old world, not with fire, but with fear. Yet, in the silence that followed, humanity didn't vanish. It adapted, it questioned, it evolved. What survived was not just a weakened people, but a wiser one. Peasants rose, science was born, faith was reshaped, art became darker, deeper, more human. In its cruelty, the plague left behind a strange kind of gift, the knowledge that everything can change and must. The Black Death was not the end of the world. It was the end of one world and the beginning of another. And though centuries have passed, its shadow still lingers in our medicine, in our cities, and in every whisper of fear when a new illness arrives. Because once, long ago, death wore a mask and walked among us, and the world has never forgotten.